for 30 years. One man has stood between this world and the dark, the symbol of peace, the smile you can see from across a burning city. A man who taught 8 billion people that fear was optional. And in all that time, nothing has ever made him stop smiling. Nothing. Until now. What if a hole opened in the floor of the world's worst secret, and something walked out that hero society has no word for? Not a quirk, not a mutation, not a villain. Something older than the registry, older than the rankings, older than the light. What if Aizawa Shota looked at him with the eyes that cancel anything, and found nothing there to cancel? What if All for One, the collector, the thief, the man who has taken every power he ever wanted, reached out his hand and closed it on empty air? They will call him a villain, because it is the only word they have. He will let them. He has been called worse, in older languages, by better men, and every single one of them is dead. This is what happens when the ultimate being steps into the age of heroes, when time itself becomes a weapon nobody can see coming, when the symbol of peace has to learn that some things cannot be punched. Written by me. And this one exists because Connor Devine dropped it in the comments and asked the question out loud. So if you've got a collision you need to see, name the universe, name the character, and put it down below. Any world, anyone. That's how these get made. That's how this one got made. Now, somewhere beneath a quiet Japanese hillside, in a room that does not appear on any map, a door is opening, and on the other side of it, the sun is already down. Ono Hisashi had worked in the basement for 4 years, and in that time, he had trained himself out of the habit of asking where the bodies came from. It was not difficult. That was the thing nobody told you about a place like this. You expected it to be difficult. You expected some night in your second year to be the night you finally broke, wept into your hands, walked up the long service stair into the pine-smelling dark, and never came back. That night never arrived. Instead, the work simply became work. The tanks became equipment. The things in the tanks became inventory. And the smell, that particular smell, chemical sweetness laid over something meaty and sour underneath, the smell that got into the weave of his clothes and rode home with him. The smell became the smell of his job, the way a bakery smells of bread. He signed for deliveries. He calibrated the nutrient feeds. He mopped. Tonight he was mopping because the doctor was excited, and when the doctor was excited, things ended up on the floor. Hold it steady, Garaki was saying, up on the gantry, to nobody, to the room, to the machine. Hold it, hold it, hold. Ha, look at that aperture. Do you see what I'm being asked to accomplish here? Do you see? Ono did not look up. Looking up was not in the job. The chamber was 40 meters across and roughly spherical, poured concrete, ribbed with cable trays that hung down in loops like intestines. At the center, in a cradle of steel and heavy leather, sat the subject. Garaki called it Threshold. It had no eyes and no skin, and its skull had been opened at the crown like a soft-boiled egg, and out of 6 drilled sockets down the length of its spine came a slow, continuous exhalation of purple mist that pooled and crept along the floor and made Ono's mop water go strange and syrupy where the two met. They had been at this for 19 months. The principle was simple enough that even Ono had picked it up in fragments, from the doctor's monologues, from the way the old man talked to himself, the way other men breathe. There was an asset in the organization who could open doors. Not doors. The word Garaki used was apertures. Rip a hole in the here, sew its edges to a somewhere else, step through. Beautiful, efficient, and this was the part that offended the doctor down in the marrow of him. Limited. The asset had to know the destination, had to have seen it, had to hold the far side in his mind like a photograph, or the aperture wouldn't take. Garaki thought that was a failure of imagination, not the assets. The quirks. So he had built a Nomu whose entire biology was one enormous amplifier, and he had grafted the door opening onto it, and he had spent 19 months winding the gain up notch by notch, looking for the ceiling, looking for the place where the quirk stopped needing to know where it was going, and simply went. Feed, Garaki said. Somewhere a pump engaged. The Nomu's chest heaved once, hugely, and the purple mist stopped being a leak and became a flow. And Ono, this was reflex. 4 years of reflex. The same reflex that makes a man step back from a curb. Ono put down his mop and moved toward the wall. The aperture opened at the center of the chamber, and it was wrong immediately. He had seen the asset work, twice. The asset's portals were tidy. A neat black oval, a rim of violet fire, a whisper like a page turning, and then a man stepped through and the oval closed, and that was that. Clean. Almost polite. This was not polite. This was a wound. It tore itself open across 5 meters of empty air, with a sound like a wet rope going taut, and it did not have a rim. It had edges, ragged and fluttering, and the black inside it was not black at all. It was depth. It was distance. Ono looked into it, and his eyes hunted for a focal point, and found none. Kept going, and his stomach turned over the way it does when you lean too far over a railing. Garaki made a small sound. It took Ono a moment to identify it, because he had never heard the doctor make it before. It was fear. Then the aperture found the far side, and the far side resolved, and every man in that concrete room stopped breathing at once. Beyond the tier was a room, and the room was not in Japan. Sandstone, great blocks of it, honey-colored, fitted without mortar, rising into an arch dark that the light could not reach the top of. A staircase, wide, shallow-stepped, curving up and away, flanked by torches. Real torches, live flame, standing in iron cressets, throwing that particular unsteady orange that no bulb has ever managed to fake. There was a floor of red tile. There was a woven rug, black and gold. There was a window somewhere off to the left, out of sight, because through the tear came a thin, dry wind that smelled of dust and cooling stone and distant water, and it was a night wind, and it crossed 40 meters of laboratory and touched Ono Hisashi's face, and it was warm. 19 months of work, and Garaki had reached out and put his hand on somewhere else entirely. The doctor was clutching the gantry rail. "Where?" he said. His voice had gone up an octave. "Where is that? Coordinates. Somebody get me. Is that Egypt? That's Egypt. That's who has a staircase." And then someone came down the staircase. Ono would think about the walk for the rest of his life, which was, as it turned out, about 90 seconds long. He would think about it in a compressed and useless way, the way you think about the truck in the instant before it reaches you, because the walk told you everything, if you had the sense to read it. A man in a house he owns comes down his own stairs a certain way, unhurried, half attending. And somewhere on that staircase, somewhere between the 4th step and the 3rd, this man had looked up and noticed that a section of his wall had been replaced by a concrete room full of strangers and machinery, and a skinless thing in a leather cradle. And he did not stop walking. He did not stop, and he did not slow, and he did not reach for anything, and his expression did not change by 1 degree. And that was the moment Ono Hisashi understood that everyone in this basement was already dead. He was tall. He came off the last step onto the red tile, and stood in his own torchlight, and looked through the tier at them, the way a man looks into a fish tank he did not order. Blonde, thickly and expensively so, the hair swept back off a face that had been assembled by somebody with an agenda. Black jacket, cut away at the chest, gold hearts at the shoulders. Pale, not sick pale, not indoors pale, pale like a statue that has never been out in weather. And around his throat, catching the flame light, a fine raised seam ran the whole way around, a hairline of scar tissue, as though the head had been taken off and put back on by someone who cared about the join. His eyes were red, not costume red, not a quirk's glow, wet, arterial, lit, with the pupils standing in them long and vertical like a cat's in the dark. He said. He said it in a language Ono did not speak, and Ono understood it perfectly. And never afterward, in the 80 seconds left to him, did that strike him as strange. Garaki recovered first. Garaki, to his enormous discredit, recovered because he was a scientist, and the fear had already been overwritten by something stronger. "Sir," he called down, and he was smiling. The mad old bird was smiling. "Sir, I don't know how much of this you're following, but you are standing in front of the single most significant. Would you be willing? Would you hold still?" The man on the red tile tipped his head very slightly, considering, the way you consider a menu. Then he stepped through. The tear did not resist him. That was somehow the worst part, Ono thought. The aperture had been fighting them for 19 months, had killed 4 Nomu and 2 technicians, had to be forced open with a machine the size of a bus, and this man walked through it as though it were a doorway that had been left open for him. Warm night air came with him. He stood on the concrete of a secret facility beneath a hillside in a country that would not exist for 100 years by his reckoning, and he took one breath of it. and something happened to his face. Hunger. Naked. Undisguised. Absolutely without shame. His nostrils flared. The pupils went from slits to needles. He turned his head and looked, for the first time, at the men. Not at the machine. Not at the Nomu. At the men. "Ah," he said, and this time it was pleasure. "You keep livestock down here." Garaki was still talking. Something about consent forms. Something about compensation. The doctor's voice climbing and climbing. The man was not listening. He had turned to the two security officers who had come off the wall with their batons up and their stances correct and their quirks already burning. Ono knew them, Tanabe with the hardening, Ishii with the flashbang palms, both of them good, both of them ex-force, both of them worth every yen the organization paid. And then, Ono blinked. That was all. One blink, a single stupid involuntary flutter of the eyelid, the kind that happens 40,000 times a day and means nothing. And when his eyes opened, Tanabe and Ishii were on the floor, not falling, not staggering. On the floor, 4 meters from where they had been standing, arranged in postures that human joints do not make, and the concrete between them was painted in a wide arterial fan that was still arriving, still spattering down out of the air, as though the blood had been thrown a full second before the men were opened. Nobody screamed. There hadn't been time to build a scream. There had been a room with 2 men standing in it, and then, with no interval, no motion, no sound, no event, a room with 2 men down. And the blond man was standing between them now, and he had not walked there. He was licking his thumb. "You should feel privileged," he said mildly. To the room in general, to the whimpering doctor, to Ono, to the mop lying in its spreading gray puddle. Very few have ever seen what you have just seen. He considered his thumb, and his own smile widened around it, and the teeth behind it were long. Of course, you did not see it. That is rather the point. The Nomu came out of its cradle. It came out fast, faster than a thing that size should manage, straps parting like wet paper, the leather cradle exploding into fragments, 40 tons of engineered muscle crossing the chamber in a single bound with its beak open and its mist boiling. 19 months and 11 billion yen, and Dr. Kyudai Garaki's finest work in a decade, coming down on one unarmed man like a dropped building. The man did not move. Something else did. Ono only saw it because of where he was standing, flat against the wall, at the exact angle, with the torchlight from the still open tear behind him. For a fraction of an instant, in the air beside the man's shoulder, the darkness of the room went thick. Something occupied space there, something with a shape. He got an impression of gold, of a blank helmeted head, of eyes that were narrow and cold and profoundly uninterested, of an arm drawn back. And then threshold, all 40 tons of it, came apart, not fell, came apart, burst outward from the middle in a single wet concussive instant, as though it had been struck at once by every point of a fist that was somehow larger on the inside, and the pieces of it hit the far wall 30 meters away and stuck there and slid. The purple mist went out like a candle. The aperture, unfed, began to close. The honey-colored stone and the torches and the warm, dry night narrowing, a slot, a line, a seam, gone. The last of that other world's air moved through the chamber and was swallowed by the extractors. And in the silence that followed, standing in a lake of ruin with a rain of somebody else's blood cooling on his shoulders, Dio began to laugh. It was not a villain's laugh. Ono had heard villains laugh. Villains laugh because they are frightened, and they want you to be frightened too. This was the laugh of a man who has just been given a gift he did not expect and is not yet sure of the size of, delighted, almost boyish, rolling up out of him and echoing off the concrete. "A world," he said, to nobody, "that builds this." He gestured, without looking, at the smear that had been the crown of Garaki's career. In a basement, casually. He turned in a slow circle, red eyes moving over the tanks, the gantries, the cable trays, the shivering old man clutching the rail. "And you keep it underground. What on earth do you keep upstairs?" The wall speakers came on with a soft click. The voice that came out of them was calm and cultured and entirely at ease, and it filled the ruined chamber the way water fills a cup. "That," said All for One, "is precisely what I was about to ask you." There was a rule in the facility, unwritten, that every man learned in his first week. When the speakers came on, you knelt. Ono knelt. He did it without deciding to, the way his knees had learned to do it, and the concrete was wet and warm under him, and he did not care, because kneeling was the only instruction his body still had access to. Dio did not kneel. Dio looked up at the speaker grill with an expression of enormous, gathering interest, the way a man looks at a snake that has just, unexpectedly, spoken. "A voice in the ceiling," he said. "How theatrical," says the man who arrived by tearing a hole in the century, said All for One. And Dio laughed again, one short bark of it, genuine, surprised out of him. And that was when Ono knew, in the animal part of him that had been screaming since the aperture opened, that the worst thing that would happen tonight was not the two dead officers. The worst thing was that these two were going to get along. They walked him up. That was the phrase they used afterward. The ones who lived, they walked him up. Nobody escorted Dio anywhere. There were no restraints, no perimeter, no formation. There was simply a corridor and a series of doors that opened as he approached them and closed after he had passed, and a man who strolled through a maximum security facility with his hands behind his back and his head tilted, reading the walls. He stopped once. There was a viewport in the corridor at shoulder height, thick laminate, looking into a holding cell, and inside the cell something enormous and gray was pressed against the glass with its brain out in the air and its beak grinding slowly, endlessly, against nothing. Dio looked at it for a long moment. "You made this," he said. Not a question. The speakers here were smaller, set into the ceiling every 10 meters, and All for One's voice moved along with him, passing from one to the next, never breaking stride. "I commissioned it. There is a difference. The difference is roughly 40 years of patience. And what is it for? For nothing yet. That is what patience is. A pause, unhurried, almost affectionate. You look at it, and you see a weapon. Everyone does. It is not a weapon. It is a sentence I have not finished writing." Dio put 2 fingers on the laminate. On the other side, the Nomu did not react. It had no eyes to react with, but its grinding stopped, all at once, and it turned its ruined head toward the glass and held very, very still. Said Dio, and walked on. Ono followed. Nobody had told him to. He had gotten up off the wet floor and fallen in behind, because Dio had glanced at him once on the way out of the chamber. One flick of those red eyes, half a second, less. And in that half second, Ono had understood that a decision had been made about him, and that he did not know what it was, and that he would find out when he was told. That was the thing about the man. Ono thought about it for the whole long walk, and he would think about it for years after. In 4 years underground he had met villains. He had processed them, mopped up after them, signed for the parts of them that came back. He knew what a villain was. A villain was a man with an appetite and a grievance, and the grievance was always the same grievance underneath the costume, and it was always, in the end, small. Dio had no grievance. Dio was not angry at anything. Dio walked through a corridor full of engineered horrors with the mild, pleasant curiosity of a wealthy man touring a distillery, and that was the thing that had Ono's hands shaking so badly he had to lace them together in front of him. Because a man with a grievance can be satisfied. A man with an appetite cannot. The room at the end had a fireplace in it. That was so absurd that Ono nearly laughed. 60 meters below a hillside, past 4 blast doors and a decontamination lock, past the tanks and the beaks and the mist, a long room with a rug and bookshelves and 2 deep chairs facing a fire that was burning real wood. In one of the chairs sat a man in a black suit with a machine, where his face should have been. He was not large. That was the first surprise, and it lasted about 4 seconds, which was as long as it took for Ono's nervous system to catch up with what the rest of him already knew. The suit was perfect. The hands were folded in the lap, gloved, absolutely still. Where a head should be, there was a black respirator shell, ribbed hoses running down into the collar, a single dark slit where a visor might be, and behind that slit, nothing. No shine, no suggestion of an eye. Just depth. He did not stand. "Sit," said All for One. "Or don't. I imagine you've been standing for a while." Dio sat. He sat the way a king sits, which is to say, he did not so much lower himself into the chair as permit the chair to arrive underneath him. He crossed one leg over the other. The firelight found the seam at his throat and ran along it like a wire. For a while, neither of them said anything. The fire popped. Ono stood by the door with his heart going like a bird in a box, and understood that he was watching 2 very old animals decide, in complete silence, whether the room was large enough. "You are not from here," All for One said at last. "No, not from now, no. Your accent is a museum piece. Your teeth are wrong. Your body temperature, a slight tilt of the black shell, is approximately that of the room, and the room is 19 degrees. You have no pulse. You have a surgical scar circling your neck that no surgeon in this country could produce, and you crossed 130 meters of open floor in less than 1/100th of a second without displacing air. You were watching. I am always watching. It is most of what I do." All for One's gloved fingers moved slightly, a small, precise gesture, the first he had made. "You broke 19 months of my work and 11 billion yen of my money in under 2 seconds, and I find that I am not angry. Do you understand how rare that is?" Dio smiled. "You are not angry because you are calculating. I am not angry because you are interesting, and I have not been interested since 1998. The head tilted the other way. "Now, what is your quirk?" And Ono, by the door, saw Dio's smile change. It did not widen, it sharpened. It went from the smile of a man enjoying a conversation to the smile of a man who has just discovered that the conversation is a card game and that he is the only one at the table who knows it. "My what?" "Your quirk." A pause. "Your power. The thing you did to my Nomu. In this country we call it a quirk. Roughly 80% of the population has one. It is inherited, it manifests around age 4. It is registered by the state, and it is the organizing principle of every institution you will encounter in this world. You didn't know. I did not. Then this will be a very educational evening for both of us." All for One unfolded his hands. "May I?" He reached out. It was not fast. That was what struck Ono, that after everything he had seen tonight, the thing that raised the hair on his arms was a slow gesture. A gloved hand extended across the gap between 2 chairs, palm open, unhurried, the way you'd offer to take someone's coat. Ono had been in this organization 4 years. He had never seen the hand. He had only ever heard about it, in the way you hear about weather in a country you'll never visit. That hand had taken 140 quirks out of 140 living bodies. It had taken a man's fire and left him screaming in the ash of his own house. It had reached out once, 5 years before Ono was hired, and closed on the throat of a hero named Nana Shimura. Dio watched it come. He did not move. He did not stop time. He simply watched, with his head slightly on one side and an expression of perfectly genuine, perfectly relaxed curiosity, and he let it touch him. Black veins bloomed up All for One's wrist and vanished under the cuff. The fire popped. Nothing happened. Nothing continued to happen for 4 full seconds, which, in that room, was an eternity, with a shape and a weight. All for One's hand rested on Dio's chest, over the sternum, over the place where a heart would be in a man who had one. The black veins pulsed once, twice, questing. The respirator's rhythm did not change. Nothing about the man in the black suit moved at all, and then, very slowly, he took his hand back and looked at it. "There's nothing there," said All for One. "No, there is nothing there." And for the first time the voice had a burr in it, a fractional roughness, like a record finding a scratch. "I have taken the power out of 8,000 people. I have taken quirks that the men who owned them didn't know they had. I have reached into a newborn and felt the shape of what it would become in 11 years. I put my hand on your chest, and I felt—" He stopped. "Yes?" said Dio. He was enjoying himself now. He was enjoying himself so much that the pupils had gone to slits. "Furniture," All for One said. "I felt furniture. I felt a coat on a hook, a body with the lights off." The black shell turned toward the fire. "What are you?" "I am a man who died," said Dio, and did not agree to it. He stood. He crossed to the fire and put his hands behind his back and looked down into it, and the flame lit him from below in a way that made Ono's stomach turn over, because for a moment there was no shadow behind him at all, and then there was one, and it was not shaped correctly. "You have a marvelous world," Dio said. "Truly. I have been in it for 11 minutes, and I am already in love with it. 8 billion people, and 80% of them are born with a power. Is that right? Born with it. They don't earn it. They don't build it in a cellar over a century with their hands and their hate. It simply arrives, at age 4, like a tooth." He turned. "Do you know what that means? Tell me." "It means power here is cheap." The word came out of him with something close to tenderness. "It means no one in this world has ever had to want it, and a man who has never had to want a thing does not know what to do with it when it comes. He spread his hands. You have 8 billion people who can do the impossible, and you have organized them into a profession, with rankings and merchandise. I saw a vending machine in your corridor with a hero's face on it. "Number 7, said All for One. "He gets a royalty. He gets a royalty." Dio closed his eyes. He looked, briefly, like a man listening to music. In my world, there were 9 of us. 9, on the whole earth, who could do what I can do, and every one of the other 8 spent their lives trying to put me in the ground, and one of them very nearly managed it. His eyes opened. And here, there are billions, and none of them are hunting anything. They're queuing, they're filing paperwork, they're waiting for a license. "You're wondering why no one has taken it," All for One said. "I am wondering why you have not taken it," said Dio. "You have had 40 years and a basement full of gods. What have you been doing?" The fire popped. Ono, by the door, stopped breathing entirely, because that was the question you did not ask. Nobody asked that question. Men had gone into the tanks for less than the shape of that question. All for One laughed. It was a dry, papery sound, and it went on longer than Ono liked. "Ah," he said, "there it is. That's the thing you have that I don't." He rose at last, and standing he was broad, and the suit did not disguise what it was hanging on. "You think this is about the taking. You think the world is a fruit, and the only question is, who has the longest arm?" He walked to the shelf, and his gloved hand touched a photograph frame there, face down. "I could take it tomorrow. I could have taken it in 1985. Do you know what stopped me? Enlighten me. Not a person, not for a long time. What stopped me was arithmetic." The black shell turned. "A conquered world has to be held. You put your boot on 8 billion people, and 80% of them can set your boot on fire. So you don't take a world, you take its hope. You find the thing they believe in, and you hollow it out, quietly, over decades, and you let them keep the shell. Because a man will fight to the death for a shell if he never learns it's empty." The hoses hissed softly. "That is what I have been doing. For 40 years, I have been farming." Dio looked at him, and Ono watched. He was the only one alive who watched it, and he would never be able to explain it to anyone. He watched Dio's face go through something like respect. "Then we are the same animal," Dio said. "We are not. You want to be worshipped. I want to be inevitable." All for One turned the photograph frame over. "But I think we want the same weather." He gestured, and a panel in the wall lit up. It was a news feed, muted, aerial footage, shaky, shot from a helicopter over a district that had been an office district that morning and was now a slope of concrete and glass. 60, 70 stories of it come down, dust standing in the air in a column half a kilometer high, and in the middle of it, walking out of the dust. Ono had seen this footage 100 times. Everyone had. It ran on every anniversary. It ran in schools. A figure came out of the cloud carrying people. Not 1, not 4. Rows of them. Over the shoulders, under the arms. Cradled, hanging on. 42 human beings piled onto one man, who was walking out of a collapsed city block, as though he were carrying groceries. The dust boiled off him, and as he came clear, he turned his face up to the helicopter, and he was grinning, hugely, without a mark on him, and he raised one hand, and the whole ruined street behind him was screaming. And even with the sound off, you could see it. You could see the exact instant when 11,000 terrified people stopped being terrified, all at once, because he had smiled at them. Dio had gone very still. "His name is All Might," said All for One. "He is the symbol of peace. In the last 22 years, he has personally reduced the violent crime rate of this nation by 6% per annum, which is not a statistic, it is a religion. There is not a child in this country who cannot draw him from memory." A pause. "He is the shell I have been hollowing out, and he is not hollow yet." Dio did not answer. He was looking at the screen, at the figure in the dust with its arms full of the saved, at the light coming off it, because there was light coming off it. That was the thing. Some trick of the sun through the dust column, some accident of the lens, and the man was standing in the middle of a broken street haloed like something off the ceiling of a church. "They call him the Sun," All for One said, conversationally. "In the tabloids, the son of Musutafu. It's a little much, personally, but you can see why it sticks." Ono, by the door, was watching Dio's hands. They had closed. Not into fists. Dio did not make fists. Ono would come to learn. Fists were for men who had to hit things. The fingers had simply drawn in, slowly, until the nails were against the pale palms, and there they stopped. And on that beautiful, arranged, unbothered face, for exactly as long as it took to blink, something moved that Ono had no name for and would never see again. Then it was gone, and Dio was smiling, and he said, lightly, "The sun." "Yes." "How poetic," said Dio. "I hate poetry." He turned away from the screen, and the smile he was wearing when he turned had teeth in it. "Doctor," he said, and behind him, in the doorway, Ono jolted, because Garaki had been brought up and was standing there in his ruined lab coat, with his glasses in his hand, blinking, still bleeding from one ear. "You have machines. You have wonderful machines. I destroyed one of them and I apologize. I will pay for it in a currency you will find extremely agreeable." He put a hand on the old man's shoulder, and Garaki's knees nearly went. "Tell me, can they measure light? Light? Wavelength? Intensity? Of course. We have full spectro. Ultraviolet," said Dio, "specifically, and I would like the results kept between us." All for One said nothing. He had folded his hands again. The dark slit of his visor was pointed at Dio's back, and behind it, in that depth where an eye should be, something had begun to calculate, carefully, patiently, in the way it had calculated for 40 years, the precise dimensions of the thing that had just walked into his house. "He is afraid of the light," thought All for One, "and he does not know that I know." He let the silence sit. He let it go on exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. And then he was gracious and warm, and the voice that came out of the black shell was the voice of a very old friend. "Stay a while," said All for One. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. He's 12. Ono Hisashi's life was 90 seconds long, measured from the moment Dio stepped through the tier. That was the truth of it, and it deserves to be said plainly, because the man himself never got to. He went down between one heartbeat and the next, somewhere in the second half of that laugh, and there was no violence in it and no sound, and nobody in that ruined chamber noticed, because everybody in that chamber was looking at the corpse of an 11 billion yen Nomu sliding down a wall. What got up off the wet concrete had Ono's face. It had his hands, and his 4 years of habits, and the exact way he laced his fingers in front of him when he was frightened. It had every memory he'd ever made, filed and cross-referenced and available on demand, including the memory of the doctor's excitement and the smell of the basement and his mother's kitchen in Sendai in 1996. It also had, buried in the soft meat behind the left eye, a seed about the size of a grape pip, with fine white threads growing out of it into the parts of a man where the eye is kept. So when the thing that used to be Ono Hisashi followed Dio up the corridor and stood by the door of a room with a fireplace in it and watched 2 very old animals measure each other, when it thought, "I am watching this, and my hands are shaking, and God, they're going to get along," every one of those thoughts was true, and none of them were his, and there was no longer any difference. That is the first thing you need to understand about him. He does not eat people. Eating is what he does for the same reason you drink water. It is maintenance, it is boring, and it is over quickly. What he does is this. The boy was in a room with the curtains shut and a screen on. He was small for 12. That was the first thing. He'd been small at 5 and he'd stayed small, the way children do when the growing gets interrupted by something. Pale hair, badly cut, hanging in his eyes. A hoodie 2 sizes too big with the sleeves pulled down over the hands, which was not about the cold. The room was warm. The room had everything in it. A bed, a console, a rack of games, a shelf of figurines still boxed, a bowl of sweets nobody had touched. He had 4 fingers, and a thumb of one hand on the controller, and 4 fingers of the other, pressed flat against his own throat, scratching. Slow, methodical, down and across, over skin that had given up years ago. Raw pink, scabbed at the edges, healing nowhere. He did not look up when the door opened. "Tomura," said All for One from the corridor. "This is a guest." He's from very far away." Dio came into the room and stopped, and looked at the boy for a long moment, and the thing wearing Ono's face, standing where it was told to stand, at the door, always at the door, watched something happen in Dio that it did not have a word for, not pity. There was no pity in the man. You could go looking for it with instruments and find the socket where it had been and the clean edges where it had been taken out. It was closer to what a violinist's face does when someone in the next room plays something badly. "He's yours," Dio said. "He's mine." "How long?" 7 years. All for One had not come in. He stood in the doorway with his gloved hands folded, and his voice was warm, and the warmth was the most frightening thing about it, because it was not fake. "I found him on a road in the rain. He'd killed his family that afternoon. All of them. His mother, his father, his sister, his grandparents, the dog. He was 5, and he did it with his hands, and he did not understand what he had done until he was standing in the middle of it." The hoses hissed, gently. He was crying so hard he could not see me coming. I picked him up. Nobody else was going to. "You picked him up," said Dio. "I picked him up." A pause. "Everyone always says it as though I'm lying. I have never lied to that boy in 7 years. I do not need to." Dio crossed the room. He did it slowly, for once, the ordinary way, one foot, then the other, letting himself be seen coming. And he sat down on the end of the bed, and the mattress did not move under him, because it never did. On the screen, something exploded in orange. The boy kept playing. "What's your name?" Dio said. "Tamura." "That isn't your name. That's what he calls you." The controller stopped. For 4 seconds, nothing at all happened in that room, and then the boy's eyes came up under the pale fringe. They were red, not Dio's red, a human red, the burst vessel red of somebody who has not slept properly since he was 5 years old, and they were flat and dull and about 1100 years old. "Shigaraki Tamura," he said. "That's his surname, and your grandmother's given name, sewn together." Dio's voice was perfectly pleasant. "He built you a name the way you'd build a chair. Did he tell you that?" "Yes," said All for One from the doorway. The boy's hand went back to his throat. "Scratch, scratch." "See," said All for One. "This is what I meant about not lying." Dio ignored him entirely. He was looking at the boy, for the first time in 7 years, and the thing at the door understood the significance of this, because it had been briefed on every soul in this facility, and it knew the boy had not held a stranger's eyes since the rain. The boy was looking back. "What do you want?" Dio said. The boy blinked. "That isn't a trick," said Dio. "It isn't a test. He's standing right there. He'll tell you if I'm being clever. I am asking you a question that no one has asked you, and I would like the true answer, and I will know if it isn't." He tipped his head. "What do you want?" The room was very quiet. "I want," said the boy, and stopped. He sat there with his mouth slightly open and the game running unattended, and the fingers going down and across, and the thing at the door watched a 12-year-old boy go looking inside himself for a wanting, and come back with nothing in his hands. "I don't know," he said. Dio stood up. He did not say anything to the boy. He walked to the door, and All for One stepped aside to let him into the corridor, courteously, and the door swung shut on the orange light, and the sound of the game, and a child scratching himself raw. They got about 10 meters. "You're building him wrong," said Dio. "Am I? You are building a weapon and calling it a son, and you are doing it badly, and it offends me." Dio stopped and turned, and there was nothing pleasant in his face now at all. "You've given him a name he didn't choose, a grief he didn't choose, and a handful of ruin he didn't choose. You've given him everything except the one thing that makes a man dangerous. And that is a want." Dio said it like a curse. Hate is not a want. Hate is weather. You can raise a boy in it the way you raise a plant in a cellar, and yes, he'll grow. He'll grow up long and pale and reaching, but he'll reach for the first light that touches him, and it will not be yours. His teeth showed. "I know. I was raised in a cellar. I was raised by a man exactly as thorough as you are, and he gave me 100 reasons to hate and not one thing to want. And do you know what I did the moment I found something I wanted?" He leaned in. "I poisoned him," said Dio, "and I have never once regretted it, and I could not tell you his face." All for One said nothing. "You have 7 years left, at most," Dio said, straightening his jacket. "Probably 5. Somewhere in that boy, there is a door you have not found, And one day, something will knock on it, and it will not be you. And on that day, everything you have built for 40 years will belong to whoever is standing on the other side." He smiled. "I'd think about that. I'd think about it quite hard." And he walked away up the corridor, whistling. An actual tune, something from 100 years ago and half a world away. 3 bars of it, off-key. The thing at the door followed. Behind them, in the doorway of a boy's bedroom, the man in the black suit stood absolutely still for 11 seconds. Then he went back in and sat down on the end of the bed and said gently, "Ignore him, Tamura. He's a guest." But the boy was not playing anymore. The boy was sitting with the controller in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance, and his hand had come away from his throat, and for the first time in 7 years, the fingers were not moving at all. "What do you want?" The results came at 4 in the morning, on paper, hand-delivered, because Dio had asked for paper. Garaki brought them himself. He had not slept. He had a burst blood vessel in one eye, and his lab coat was on inside out, and he was so happy he could barely hold the folder. "Spectrographic full sweep," he said. "Solar simulator, calibrated to Musutafu latitude, midsummer noon, and then again at 40%, 25. Sir, I have to say, in 41 years of—" "The number, Doctor, 280 to 400 nanometers, said Garaki. "It's the same. It's exactly the same. Your sun and our sun are the same sun. UVB is," he made a small, helpless gesture, "catastrophic. Total structural failure of the tissue in under a second at full intensity. It doesn't burn, it unwrites. I've never seen a material do that. Not a material, I mean you understand. And the shielding?" Garaki's face did something complicated. "Nothing works," he said. "Sir, nothing works. I've tried 41 compounds tonight. I've tried lead. I've tried the polymer we use for the— Nothing works. Because it isn't a photon problem. It's not doing physics. It's doing—" He stopped and swallowed and said the word like a man confessing to something. "Judgment. It's doing judgment. It's not light hitting you, sir. It's light finding you." And Dio laughed. He laughed for a long time, standing in the dark of a facility 60 meters underground, and the thing that had been Ono Hisashi stood by the wall and understood, distantly, that it was hearing a man laugh at the fact of his own execution and enjoying it. 113 years, Dio said when he was done, and it followed me across the universe. Well, good. He wiped his eye with his thumb. Good. A man should never be allowed to become comfortable. He took the folder. He did not open it. "Doctor, the gray ones, in the tanks, the Nomu, you grow those?" Yes. Well, we begin with a donor body, of course. There's always but the augmentation, the reinforcement, the tolerances. I can make a body hold 6 quirks now. 6. In 2003 it was 2, and the second one killed them in 11 minutes. And now— "Doctor," said Dio. Something in his voice made the old man stop. Dio put one hand up to his own throat. He did it almost absently. The way a man touches a wedding ring he stopped noticing 30 years ago, and he ran 2 fingers along the fine raised seam that circled it, all the way around, the join that no surgeon in this country could have made. "I have been wearing another man's body for 113 years, he said. "It was a very good body. It belonged to the finest man I ever met, and I took it off him while he was dying, and it has never once fit." His fingers stopped on the seam. "Every hour of every day for 113 years, Doctor. This body has been someone else's, and I have felt him in it, and there is nothing in my world that could ever have given me another." He looked down at the old man. "You grow bodies," said Dio, "to order, in a basement, casually." Garaki's mouth was open. "Doctor," said Dio, and his voice was almost kind, "how would you like to be remembered?" They found the sidekick at 6:40 in the morning, in a service alley off Route 12, sitting up. That was in the report, and the report was wrong, because he wasn't sitting. Sitting requires muscle tone. He had been arranged, propped in the corner where 2 walls met, legs out, hands in his lap, head tipped back against the brickwork with his eyes open, and his provisional license still clipped to his belt. His name was Sasada Kohei. He was 19. He had a hardening quirk, the fourth strongest in his graduating class, and he had been 11 weeks into his first agency posting, and he had been very, very good at his job, and none of that had made the slightest difference. Aizawa Shota crouched over him for 6 minutes without speaking. There were 2 punctures in the left side of the neck, 4 centimeters apart, 7 millimeters across. Clean. No tearing, no bruising around them, which was the part that would keep the examiner up nights, because bruising is what happens when a thing takes hold of you and you pull. Sasada Kohei had not pulled. Sasada Kohei had not moved at all, and he was empty, not exsanguinated. The word in the report was exsanguinated, because that was the only word the form had. But Aizawa had seen exsanguination, and exsanguination is a mess. Exsanguination is a lake. This was a 19-year-old boy with no blood in him, and none anywhere else either, in an alley with a dry floor, and a face that had never had time to be afraid. "Quirk factor," said the junior, behind him, with his notebook out. "No. Sir, there's no quirk factor," said Aizawa. He hadn't blinked in a while. "Run it. Run every drain quirk on the registry, every predation quirk, every fluid manipulation, every mutation with a mandible. You'll get 400 hits, and none of them will be this. How do you? Because a quirk leaves a shape." Aizawa stood up, slowly, and his knees cracked, and he was 31 years old and looked 50. "Every quirk on Earth has a mechanism. The mechanism has a signature. You can look at a wound and read the man out of it, every time, because the power comes out of him, and it's got his fingerprints on it." He pulled the goggles down off his forehead and settled them, and did not put them on. "There's nothing on this boy. No residue, no factor, no signature. He's not a crime scene, he's a—" He stopped. "He's a what, sir?" Aizawa Shota looked at the 2 neat holes in a dead child's neck, and felt, for the first time since he was 15 years old, and found out what his eyes could do, something go loose under his feet. His quirk erased quirks. That was all. That was the whole of it. He had built a life, a career, a body, and an entire way of being a man in the world, on top of one simple promise. Whatever you are, I can switch you off. It had never failed. It had never needed to be defended, because in a world where 80% of everything is a quirk, a man who cancels quirks is standing on the ground floor of reality. He looked at that alley and understood that somewhere out there was something his eyes had nothing to say to. "Nothing," he said. "Sir, nothing. Log it and get him home to his mother." Sir Night-Eye ran the foresight on the 9th of every month, at 9 in the morning, in his own office, with the door locked and the blinds down. It was a ritual, and All Might humored it, the way you humor a friend's superstition. Came in, sat down, put his enormous hand out palm up on the desk with a grin, and said the same joke he had said every month for 6 years, about how Night-Eye should really charge for this. Night-Eye did not laugh. He never laughed. He touched the hand. 2 seconds. That was all it took. Contact to make the link. And then he looked up into those blue eyes and let the hour run. 1 hour of a man's future. Perfect. Complete. Down to the dust in the air. And immutable. That was the price of it. And Night-Eye had paid it for 12 years. He had never once seen a future he could change. Not once. He had seen 41 deaths coming, and he had prevented 41 deaths. And every single time the thing he did to prevent it had been in the vision already, sitting there, waiting for him, because you cannot outrun a thing that has already watched you run. The hour began. All Might in a corridor. Concrete. Underground. That was already strange. All Might had no operation underground on the 9th, none scheduled, and Night-Eye's mind made a small clean note of it and let the hour keep running the way you let a tape keep playing. All Might walking, All Might's hand on a door, All Might going through, a room, dark. Something at the far end, standing, back turned, and the light was bad and the shape resolved, and it was a man, tall, blonde in black, and All Might was saying something, and taking a step forward, and lifting his fist, and the fist was drawing back, and the air in the room was starting to move, the way it always did, the way it had moved on every rooftop and in every wreck for 22 years. the way it moved when the symbol of peace decided that something was going to stop. And then the hour stopped. Not ended. Stopped. Night Eye sat in his chair with his hand on his friend's hand and stared into a single frame. One image. All Might in mid-step, fist back, coat lifted, mouth open around the first syllable of a word. A photograph. Not a paused film, because a paused film still has the film in it, still has the next frame waiting behind the glass, and this had nothing behind it. This had nothing behind it. It was a wall. It was a still image hung across the corridor of the world. 11 seconds. 11 seconds of a frozen frame in a thing that had never, in 12 years, been anything but relentlessly, horribly in motion. And then the film came back, and All Might was on the floor. He was on the floor, and there was so much blood that Night Eye's mind refused it for a full second. Refused it the way you refuse a word in a language you don't speak. And the blonde man was standing over him with his back still turned, still, unmoved, unmoved, in the exact posture he had been in 11 seconds and one lifetime earlier. And All Might was not moving. All Might was not moving. All Might was. The hour ended. Sir Night Eye let go of the hand. He sat there, behind the desk, in his own office, with the blinds down. His glasses had slid down his nose. He did not push them back up. Across from him, the greatest man alive leaned back in his chair and beamed at him and said, "Well, am I getting a haircut?" "No," said Sir Night Eye. "Nothing. A quiet month." He heard himself say it. He listened to the words come out of his own mouth in his own voice, with his own flat delivery, and some part of him stood off to one side and watched them go, the way you watch a glass leave the edge of a table. 12 years. 12 years of telling this man the truth, in rooms with the blinds down, of saying there is a girder above you on the 14th, at 11:40, and do not take the eastern approach, and the third one is not a hostage. 12 years of being the one person on earth who could look into that grin and see the hour behind it. It was the entire architecture of him. It was the reason he had been chosen, the reason he stayed, the reason he ironed his shirts and locked his door, and never, ever laughed. No, nothing. A quiet month. All Might beamed. He clapped his hands on his knees and stood, and the office got smaller the way it always did when he stood. And he said something about lunch and something about the intern, and he went out, and the door clicked, and his footsteps went away down the corridor whistling. Night Eye sat. The blinds were down. The clock on the wall did what clocks do. He had never lied to All Might. Not once, not about anything, not even the small ones. Not even "I slept fine" or "the tea is good." It had been a point of religion. And he had just done it in under 2 seconds without any conscious decision at all. The way a hand comes off a stove. He took his glasses off and folded them and set them on the desk and put both palms flat on either side of them. Because here was the thing. He had never changed a future, not once in 12 years. Every intervention he had ever made was already in the film. He had watched himself shout the warning and watched the warning work, and the moral of 12 years of foresight was carved in him like a name in a wall. The hour happens. You do not beat it, you are furniture inside it. The only mercy the world had ever given Sir Night Eye was that it had never yet shown him something he could not live inside. And this morning it had shown him All Might on a concrete floor. He put his glasses back on. Then he did the second unprecedented thing of his life. He opened his notebook to a clean page, and he did not write down what he had seen. He wrote down what he had not. 11 seconds. No frames. Not slow. Not dark. Absent. He underlined absent twice. And then he sat for a very long time looking at that word, because in 12 years the future had been many things. Brutal, banal, unbearable, but it had never once been missing. They met in a car park at 2:30, because Aizawa Shota did not do offices. He was leaning against a concrete pillar with a coffee going cold in his hand and 4 days of stubble, and the look of a man who had gone straight from an alley to a desk to another alley without stopping anywhere with a bed in it. He had the file under his arm. He had not opened it in 9 hours. He did not need to. "You're Night Eye." "Yes. You wear a suit to a car park." "I wear a suit to everything," said Night Eye. And Aizawa made a small sound, that in another man would have been a laugh. They stood there, two of the most precise minds in Japanese hero work, in a concrete box that smelled of oil, neither one willing to be the first to say it. Night Eye said it. Sasada Kohei, 19. Aizawa's eyes didn't move. Provisional license. Hardening quirk. Could take a truck at the chest and walk it off. 11 weeks in. Good kid. Boring kid. The kind that files his reports on time and doesn't get himself into anything. He drank the cold coffee. No quirk factor. That isn't possible. No, Aizawa agreed. It isn't. Every power leaves a mechanism. Every power leaves a mechanism. And every mechanism leaves a shape. And you can read the man out of the wound. Yeah, I know the poem. I've been saying it for 6 years. He crushed the cup. I stood over that boy for 6 minutes, and there was nothing there to read. It's not a small signature. It's not a rare signature. There is no signature. It's like, he stopped and looked for the word, and found the same one Night Eye had underlined twice. It's like something reached in from outside the alphabet, said Aizawa. The car park hummed. Your quirk, said Night Eye. Erasure. What about it? You cancel quirks. I cancel quirks. Only quirks. Aizawa Shota looked up. He looked up, and for a half-second, something crossed that tired, unshaven face that no one alive had ever seen there. Because Aizawa did not do fear. Aizawa did fear the way other men do a tax return. Competently, quarterly, alone. Yeah, he said, only quirks. You have never once had to think about that sentence. No, said Aizawa, I haven't. Neither had I, said Night Eye, about mine, and he told him. Not all of it. He told him about 11 seconds of nothing in a thing that had never had a nothing in it, and he watched a man who canceled the impossible for a living stand in a concrete car park and understand, at the same instant Night Eye had, that they were both holding a key to a house that something had just walked past. Underground, Aizawa said at last. Concrete, poured, not paneled, old work, deep. That's the whole country. Yes. Aizawa dropped the crushed cup in the bin and missed and did not pick it up, which told Night Eye more about the state of him than anything he'd said. Don't tell him, said Aizawa. I already didn't. Good. A pause. Because he'll go. Yes, he'll go because you told him. That's the whole. That's him. That's the entire man. You hand him a room with something in it he can't beat, and he'll be through the door before you finish the sentence, grinning, because that's what the smile is for. Aizawa pushed off the pillar. So don't tell him. Find it first. Find the room and I'll go into it, and if my eyes work, we win, and if they don't, he stopped. Then somebody should know where I was, he said, and walked out into the rain. 60 meters down, in a white room, Dio was standing in front of a tank. The body inside it was 19 days old and had never breathed. It hung in the amber fluid with its arms loose and its face slack and its eyes closed under a fine mesh of feeder threads. And it was, in every particular, beautiful, because Garaki, half mad with joy, had been given a photograph and told to build to it. It had Dio's face, not the face he wore, the other one, the one that had gone into a wooden box in the North Atlantic in 1889, with a Joestar's fist through its chest, the one that had gone down through 113 years of black water, the face he had been born with, and had not owned since he was 20. Garaki had grown it out of nothing in 19 days, and it was perfect, and it was empty, and it was his. Vascular's holding, Garaki was chirping, at his elbow, at his ankles, everywhere at once. Marrow's populating. We're at day 19, and the marrow is populating. Do you understand? No donor, no template. We simply told it to be a spine, and it. Sir, this is the finest work of my life. This is, sir? Sir, are you? Dio put his hand on the glass. Behind him, against the wall, the thing that had been Ono Hisashi stood where it had been told to stand, and watched, and thought, in the borrowed way it thought about everything now, that it had seen this exact posture once before, in a corridor, at a viewport. A man with 2 fingers on laminate, looking at something that could not look back. It won't take, Dio said. Garaki's chirping stopped. I'm sorry? It won't take. Dio's reflection stood in the glass, superimposed over the sleeping face, like a double exposure, the stolen one over the true one, wearing it, hiding it. I have made bodies before, Doctor. I made 140 of them, in a castle, out of people. I have put my seed in men, and made them mine, and worn them like gloves. His fingers spread on the tank, but they were always someone's first. That is what the seed takes hold of. That is what it needs. A soul is a coat hook, Doctor. You cannot hang anything on a wall with no hook in it. He turned around. You have grown me a magnificent house, said Dio, with no door. Garaki's mouth opened and closed. But that isn't your fault, Dio went on, and he was pleasant again. He was always pleasant. And you are not to punish yourself for it. You have done something no one in the history of my world could do. It simply turns out that the problem was never the flesh. He looked back at the tank, and for a moment, one moment, the thing at the wall saw the seam at his throat catch the light. It was never the flesh. That is 113 years I would like back. Then, Garaki said, then what? What do you need? Tell me. Tell me and I'll build it. I'll build it tonight. A soul that will move, said Dio. He said it lightly. He said it the way you name a wine. One that is already in the habit of being handed on. One that has left a body before and gone into another, and knows the road, and does not have to be taught. He tipped his head. Does such a thing exist here, Doctor? And Garaki, who had never in 41 years been asked a question he could not answer, who had watched a man in a black suit take 140 quirks out of 140 screaming bodies, and had catalogued every one. Garaki went the color of paper. No, he said. He said it too fast. Dio smiled. He knows, said All for One. He knows nothing. He asked a question. Garaki was wringing his hands, actually wringing them. An old man's gesture from an old man's century. Sir, he asked about transferable. There is only one, sir. There has only ever been one. I am aware, said All for One, of how many there are. He had not moved. He sat in his chair by the fire, with his hands folded, and the black shell of his face pointed at the flames, and he had been sitting like that for 11 minutes. He was doing arithmetic. The thing about arithmetic, and he had built 180 years on this, he had farmed on this, is that it only works if you know all the terms. Give All for One a man, and he could tell you what the man wanted, and if he knew what a man wanted, he owned him, because wanting is a road, and every road has a toll. Dio wanted nothing. That was the number that would not go into the sum. He had watched the man for 6 days now, on every camera in the facility, and he had seen a creature of appetite and vanity, and enormous theatrical hunger, and every single one of those appetites was decorative. He fed because he was thirsty. He killed because it was faster. He mocked because it entertained him. Underneath all of it, in the place where All for One had never once failed to find the engine, there was 113 years of a man wearing another man's neck. Ah, he doesn't want power, said All for One, to the fire. He has power. He's had it for a century and it bores him. The hoses hissed. He wants a body. He wants his own body back, and he can't have it, so he'll take the next best thing. And the next best thing in this world is the only power in it that walks out of a corpse on its own legs and goes looking for a new one. Garaki said nothing. He wants one for all, said All for One. And then he laughed, that dry, papery, unbearable sound. And he laughed for a while, because it was, genuinely, the funniest thing that had happened to him since the Meiji era. Sir, 180 years, said All for One. 180 years I have chased my brother's little gift around this earth, and it has slipped me every single time, because it will not be taken, Doctor. It has to be given. That is the whole insufferable architecture of it. He stood, and he was enormous, and the fire threw his shadow up the wall to the ceiling. And now a corpse from another century walks into my house, and he doesn't want to take it either. He turned. He wants to be given it, said All for One. He doesn't know that yet. He thinks he wants to steal it, but he will find out, and when he finds out, he will go and stand in front of the 9th best defended thing on this planet and ask, and Garaki swallowed. And you'll stop him. All for One looked at the old man for a long moment. Doctor, he said, I am going to introduce them. They gave All Might the room. That was the elegance of it. And it took All for One 4 hours to build, which for him was slapdash, was practically improvisation, and he enjoyed it more than anything he had done in 20 years. An informant with a real name and a real history and 11 years of real service, who called his real handler with a real terror in his voice and gave up a real address, because every word of it was true. That was the trick. There was no lie anywhere in the chain. There was a facility. It was under that hillside. It did have 400 nomu in it. The tip landed at 6:12 in the evening. At 6:14, Sir Night Eye's phone rang, and he did not answer it, because he was in the shower, and he would think about that for the rest of his life. He would think about the 11 seconds of hot water that cost the world its sun. At 6:19, All Might went through the perimeter fence without slowing down. He came down the service stair 4 flights at a time, and the concrete cracked where he landed, and he was grinning, because there were 300 civilians worth of nomu in this hillside, and a doctor who made them, and a name that had been a ghost story since Nana died, and because he was 39 years old, and unkillable, and this was the best night of his life. He tore a blast door out of its frame and threw it down a corridor. He walked past a viewport where something gray pressed its ruined face to the glass, and he did not stop, but something in him went cold, and he filed it, and he would come back for it. He came to a door at the end. It was a wooden door. That was the thing that snagged him. A wooden door, warm, paneled, with a brass handle, 60 meters underground at the end of a corridor made of poured concrete and cable trays. He stood in front of it for 1 second. Then he put his hand on it and went through. The room was long and dark, and there was a fire in it. At the far end, a man was standing with his back turned, tall, blonde, black jacket, gold at the shoulders, hands behind his back, looking down into the flames as though he had all the time in the world, and knew it. You must be the sun, said Dio, without turning around. All Might's smile did not move. I'm All Might, he said. You've had a busy week. I have had a marvelous week. There's a 19-year-old boy in a drawer in Musutafu. There are 4, said Dio. You have found one. You will find the others when I want you to. And All Might stopped smiling. The thing that had been Ono Hisashi was standing in the corner of that room, in the dark, where it had been told to stand, and it saw it happen. It saw the symbol of peace stop smiling, which was a thing that had not happened on camera in 22 years, and the air in the room changed pressure. United States, All Might said, and the floor cracked under him, and the fire went flat, and 40 tons of the greatest man who ever lived came off the concrete with his fist drawn back, and every window in the hillside above them shattered from the pressure wave alone. Dio turned around. He turned around slowly, and he was smiling, and behind his shoulder the darkness got thick, and had a shape, and had a blank gold helmeted head, and narrow, cold, uninterested eyes. And he said, Zawarudo. The fire stopped, not went out. Stopped, a shape of orange standing in the grate like a held breath, every tongue of it frozen mid-lick, the sparks hanging over it in a scatter of motionless embers. The dust in the air stopped, the pressure wave stopped, a wall of it, standing across the room in a visible ripple. All Might stopped, mid-stride, mid-flight, coat lifted, fist back, mouth open around the first syllable of a word he would never finish. 40 tons of hurtling absolute force hanging in the air of a room like a photograph of itself. And Dio put his hands in his pockets and walked. He took his time. He walked all the way around him. He looked up at the man from below, at the impossible slab of him, at the arm cocked and the hand closed, at the light that even now, even stopped, even hung in a dead second, in a dead room, was somehow still coming off him, faintly, in the frozen air. Ah, said Dio, softly. There you are. He raised one hand. The world came out of him like a struck bell. 1. The first blow took All Might in the ribs and did not move him, because nothing moves in stopped time. and so the entire kinetic delivery of it went nowhere but in. 2, 3, 4. The fists came so fast they were not fists. They were a single continuous pressure, a wall arriving over and over into the same 6 inches of a chest that had never been broken. 12, 20, 40. The blood came out of him and did not fall, could not fall, hung where it left him in a slow expanding cloud of held red beads, and Dio walked through it, and it parted around him and re-hung in the air behind. 80, 100. The greatest man alive hung in the dark and took every one of them, and there was no scream, because screaming takes a second, and there was not going to be one. At 211, Dio stopped. He stood in a cloud of suspended blood, breathing hard, and that was the first time in 6 days that anything in this world had made Dio breathe hard, and no one alive would ever know it. He reached out and took All Might's face in one hand and turned it gently toward him. "You have no idea," he said, to the frozen grin, to the blue eyes that had not yet learned what had happened, "how badly I needed you to be real." Then he leaned in and put his mouth to the side of that enormous throat and drank, and the room was full of people. They came out of the dark of his own skull, uninvited, 8 of them, 9, standing in a ring in the black behind his eyes and looking at him, a woman with gray hair and a smile like a knife, an old man, a girl, a boy, a chain of them going back and back and back through 100 years of the dead, all of them looking at Dio with the same expression, and the expression was not fear. Dio tore himself away and staggered. He had not staggered since 1889. Time restarted. The fire jumped. The pressure wave completed. The cloud of blood fell all at once with a sound like rain on a roof. And All Might hit the floor. He hit the floor, and the floor lost. 30 tons of concrete, poured in 1961 by men who built for bombs, went down under him in a dish 4 meters across, and the shock wave of it took the fire out of the grate and the books off the shelves and blew the wooden door off its hinges and 40 meters up the corridor. Then the dust came down, and it was quiet, and All Might did not move. Dio stood over him with a hand pressed to his own temple and his teeth bared, and he was not looking at the body at all. He was looking at the ring. They were still there. That was the obscenity of it. He had swallowed, and they had not gone down. They were standing, 9 of them, in the black behind his eyes, in a room in his own skull that he had never given anyone the key to. A woman with gray hair and a smile like a filleting knife. An old man with his arms folded. A boy. A girl who could not have been 16. A chain of them receding backward into 100 years of dark, each one looking at him with the same expression, and the expression was the thing that had made him stagger, because Dio had been looked at by every kind of enemy this earth and one other could produce, and he had never in his life been looked at like this. Not fear, not hate, recognition. They were looking at him the way a family looks at a stranger who has walked into the wrong wake. "Get out," Dio said, aloud, in a room with no one conscious in it. The gray-haired woman tipped her head, considering, the way you consider a menu. And Dio, who had eaten 140 men and never once tasted anything but iron, understood, in an instant that went through him like a nail, that he had not drunk a power at all. He had drunk a procession, 9 people, holding hands across a century, walking a thing forward. Every one of them dead, every one of them still going. A soul that is already in the habit of being handed on, one that has left a body before and gone into another, and knows the road. "Oh," said Dio, and then All Might got up. There is no describing it, and everyone who was in that hillside tried, for years, in depositions and in bars and in the small hours to their wives. He should not have. That is the beginning and the end of the report. 211 full-force impacts into the same 6 inches of a human chest, delivered into a body that could not move away from them, could not roll with them, could not do the one thing that has kept every living creature alive since the sea, flinch. His sternum was in 9 pieces. His left lung was a bag. There was a hole in him you could put a fist through, and something had. He got a hand under himself. The concrete cracked outward from his palm. Dio turned around very slowly. "You are dead," he said. He said it flatly. The way you correct a child's arithmetic. I did that correctly. I have never done it more correctly. All Might got his knee under him. Blood came out of his mouth in a long rope, and he did not seem to notice it. And his head came up, and his hair was hanging in his eyes, and his eyes were blue, and enormous, and open, and he looked at Dio, the way a man looks at weather. And he smiled. It was not the grin. The grin was gone. The grin was somewhere back in that fire, with the books and the door, and it would be a long time coming back. What was on his face now was smaller, and worse, and it was aimed directly at Dio, and it said one thing. Is that all? All Might said. The word came out wet. He got his other foot under him and pushed, and the ruined dish of concrete groaned, and the greatest man alive stood up in a room he had no business standing up in. I'm still here. Stay down, said Dio. Can't. A cough. More rope. Sorry. Bad habit. You have a hole in your chest. Yeah. All Might swayed and caught himself and set his feet. Had one before. Dio stared at him, and the thing that had been Ono Hisashi, standing in the corner where it had been told to stand, watched Dio's face do the thing again. The thing it had done in front of a television screen 6 days ago. The thing there was no name for. Because Dio had been alive for 113 years and dead for most of them. And in all that time, exactly one man had ever stood up out of a grave Dio dug for him. One. A doctor's son with a bad haircut and a stupid family, who had gone into the sea in a burning ship with Dio's coffin in his arms and put the whole rest of the century in it. Dio knew that smile. He had seen it once before, on a burning deck in 1889. Joestar, he said. All Might blinked at him. What? And Dio laughed. It came up out of him like something breaking. He laughed until he had to put a hand on the wall, and the laugh went on in that ruined room, and All Might stood there bleeding into the concrete and watched him do it with an expression of total and profound confusion, which was, in the end, the most heroic thing about him. 113 years, said Dio, and I crossed the universe, and you are waiting for me at the bottom of it. Buddy, said All Might, I have no idea what you're... Then Aizawa came through the wall. He did not come through the door, because the door was 40 meters up the corridor. He came through the plasterboard partition to the east of it, with his capture weapon already out, and a flashbang already going, and his goggles already down. And he had run 2 kilometers of service tunnel in 4 minutes, on a tip he was not supposed to have, and his lungs were full of glass. He saw All Might. He saw the hole in All Might. And Aizawa Shota, 31 years old, underground hero, 4 days unshaven, who had never in his life had a single reason to believe he mattered, in a room with these people in it. Aizawa Shota did the only thing he had. His hair went up. The capture weapon rose around him in a slow black corona, and his eyes opened, and they were red, and he looked. Erasure, 22 seconds of it, which was his record, which he had never once needed all of. 22 seconds in which every quirk in his field of vision simply stopped, in which a man on fire went out, in which a man made of stone became a man, in which the entire organizing principle of 8 billion lives switched off like a lamp because a tired man in an alley decided it should. He put all 22 seconds into Dio. Nothing happened. Not a flicker. Not a stutter. Not a resistance. Resistance would have been something. Resistance would have meant there was a thing there pushing back. Aizawa had canceled quirks that fought him. He had canceled quirks that screamed. This was worse than all of it, because when he looked at the blonde man in the black jacket with everything he had, with the full weight of the only thing he had ever been sure of, he found a coat on a hook. A body with the lights off. Furniture. Dio turned his head and met his eyes, and the red slit pupils widened with genuine, delighted interest. Oh, said Dio. Oh, you're the one who cancels things. Aizawa did not blink. His eyes were streaming. The 22 seconds went past 22 and kept going, and the vessels in them were letting go one after another, small red blooms across the white. And he held it, he held it, he held it, because there was a man behind him with a hole in his chest, and the only thing standing between them was a lie Aizawa had believed his whole life. Look at you, said Dio softly. "Look at you trying." And he walked toward him. He did it at a normal speed. That was the mercy and the cruelty of it. He walked up to Aizawa Shota at the speed of a man crossing a room, and let him watch the whole thing, and stopped a meter away, and looked down into those bleeding red eyes with something that was nearly tenderness. "Your entire world," said Dio, "is a rule, and you are the exception to it, and that made you the most important man in the room, always, in every room, for your whole life." He tipped his head. "And now, there is a thing in front of you that is not covered by the rule. Do you know what you are, right now, in this room?" Aizawa's eyes were pouring. "You're a man," said Dio. "Just a man, in a basement, with his eyes bleeding." He reached out, and All Might was there. Nobody saw him cross the room, and there was nothing supernatural in that. Nothing but a dying man deciding. Dio's hand closed on empty air, and 40 tons of the symbol of peace put its shoulder into him, and drove him the length of the room, and through the far wall, and through the wall behind it, and into a stairwell. All Might did not follow him. He turned. He got a hand around Aizawa's arm, and his hand was shaking so badly it took 2 tries. "Kid," he said, "out. I can't erase him. I know." Blood in the words. "Out. You're, sir, you're." "I know that too," said All Might. And he looked down at Aizawa Shota, with his hair in his eyes and his chest open, and no smile at all left anywhere in him. And he said, "Somebody has to be able to tell them." And he threw him. 200 meters of service corridor, at an angle, into the arms of a man in a pinstripe suit, who had run through 4 blast doors in shoes not built for it, and arrived 11 seconds too late for the 2nd time in 1 day. Dio came out of the stairwell, brushing plaster off his shoulders, and did not pursue. He stood in the ruin of the long room and looked at the empty corridor, and the settling dust, and the flat dead fire, and he was smiling, and his eyes were far away. "You could have," said All for One. He was in the doorway. He had been in the doorway for some time. His suit was immaculate. There was not a speck of anything on him. "Yes," said Dio. 2 seconds. Less. "Yes, and instead you let the greatest obstacle to my life's work walk out of my house, on his own legs with a hole in him." The black shell tilted. "Why?" Dio turned around, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has just understood the punchline of a joke told to him a century ago. "Because he cannot give it to me if he is dead," he said. The hoses hissed, and All for One went very, very still, stiller than furniture, stiller than the room. Because in 180 years, exactly 2 people had ever worked that out, and one of them was his brother, and the other one had needed 40 years and a corpse to do it. Dio had needed 6 days and 1 mouthful. "There are 9 of them in there," said Dio dreamily. 9, holding hands, walking it forward across 100 years like a lamp in a relay. Every one of them dead, and every one of them still going, and not one of them was ever taken. He turned to All for One, and his teeth showed. "Because you can't, can you? You've tried. You've tried for 180 years, and it slips you every time, and it will slip you forever, because the only hand that can pass it is the hand that chooses to." Silence. "You knew," said Dio. "You knew when you sent him the address." "I gave you a room," said All for One. "What you did in it was yours. You used me." "Yes. You used me to break your son." "Yes," said All for One, "and I would do it again tomorrow, and you knew what I was doing when you walked into that room, and you did it anyway, and that," something moved in the depth behind the visor, "is why I am still speaking to you politely. Do not sulk. You got what you came for." Dio considered him for a long moment. Then he laughed, and clapped him on the shoulder, and All for One permitted it. And 2 of the worst things the world had ever produced stood together in a ruined room and understood each other perfectly and trusted each other not at all. "I like you," said Dio. "No, you don't," said All for One. "No," Dio agreed cheerfully. "I don't." Sir Night Eye sat on the floor of a service corridor with the symbol of peace's blood on his suit and his glasses in his lap, and Aizawa Shota unconscious against the wall beside him. And he did the arithmetic. 11 seconds. No frames, not slow, not dark, absent. He understood it now, and understanding it was worse than not. His quirk was not broken. His quirk had worked perfectly. For 12 years it had shown him the future, every second of it, unbroken, immutable, a film he could not edit. And this morning, it had shown him 11 seconds in which there was no future to show, because for 11 seconds this morning, in a room under a hill, the future had not been happening. The world had a hole in it. The hole was a man. And Sir Night-Eye, who had never once in his life changed a thing he had seen coming, sat on a concrete floor and started to shake, not from grief, not yet. That would come later and stay for years, but because for the first time since he was 19 years old, he did not know what was going to happen next. The boy was in a room with the curtains shut and the screen off. He had not turned it on in 6 days. He sat on the end of the bed with the controller in his lap, where he'd left it, and his hands open on his knees, and his throat had begun, very slightly, to heal. The door opened. "I've thought about your question," said Dio. Shigaraki Tomura looked up. "I asked you a question," Dio said. He came in and sat down on the end of the bed, and the mattress did not move. "You didn't have an answer. That isn't a failing. Nobody has ever given you one thing to want. He gave you a name and a grief and a handful of ruin, and he thinks that's a fire, and it isn't. It's weather." He leaned in, and his voice dropped, and the red eyes were the only light in the room. "So let me tell you what I know. I was raised in a cellar too, by a man exactly as thorough as him, and I spent 20 years hating, and it did nothing at all. It moved nothing. It was weather. And then one day I saw something I wanted, and the whole world changed shape around my wanting, and I have not been stopped since. Not by death, not by the sea, not by 113 years. The boy's fingers twitched toward his throat and stopped. "You have a door in you," said Dio, "and he has never found it." He stood. "I'm knocking," he said. And in a room down the corridor, in a chair by a cold fire, a man in a black suit with a machine for a face sat with his hands folded and heard a floor creak that he had heard 10,000 times before, and for the first time in 40 years, did not know which way it had gone. By dawn, every screen in the country was the same 3 seconds of phone footage, something enormous being carried out of a hillside on a stretcher meant for 2 men, under a sheet that did not cover it, and one huge pale hand hanging off the side, not moving. The nation stopped, all of it, at once, at 6:41 in the morning. Trains, kitchens, classrooms, 40 million people standing in their own front rooms with their hands over their mouths. Because the thing about a sun is that nobody ever has to be told what it means when it goes out. And in a corridor 60 meters under the ground, a man called Ono Hisashi was mopping. He had been told to. He did it well. The floor came up clean, and the water went gray, and the work was the work. And behind his left eye, a seed the size of a grape pip sat in the warm dark, with its threads run out through everything he had ever been. He got to the end of the corridor and wrung the mop, and for 1/2 of 1 second, the way a drowned man comes up once, a long way out, where nobody is looking, Ono Hisashi surfaced in his own head and thought, with perfect clarity, in his own voice, "Somebody has to tell them." Then it went under, and the hands went back to work, and the thing that wore his face carried the bucket down the corridor toward the room where the boy was, whistling 3 bars of something off-key.